Hey everyone, today I have a very dear old friend of mine, Marc Ferrari, and he is going to educate us a little bit about his career and the different phases of his career, and he's done a lot of things. You are from Batavia, New York.
That is correct. Small little cow town, which is halfway between Buffalo and Rochester in Western New York. That's they don't call it upstate New York there. They call it Western New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
It's a little too upstate for the Manhattan people.
well, yeah, it's 400 miles from New York City. So
Right. Yeah. So, how old were you when you started playing the guitar? I know that was your first instrument, right?
yeah, well, I've told the story before, and it might have been in my book Rockstar 101, Shameless
Which,
Plug.
which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, okay. But I distinctly remember the first day that I picked up a guitar. I was at a cousin's house. My mom and dad were visiting a cousin of mine on the Long Island. That's where we were living at the time before we moved to Batavia.
By the way, speaking of cousins, Marc isn't the only member of his family with talent. He's got another cousin, actress Jennifer Connelly. She started off as a child actress and leads a very successful career to this day. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think I was pretty rambunctious as a little kid, and I had a lot of energy to burn off. And I think that particular day I was probably a little too super energetic. And my cousin had a guitar there, and I just distinctly remember my mom, just giving me this thing to shut me up or keep me from running around the house. And I was instantly mesmerized by it, strumming it and hearing noises and that kind of thing. And that was my first introduction. So I was 8, and then for my 9th birthday, my folks got me a cheapo acoustic guitar, which I still have. My very first guitar is called
Wow.
And it's hard to play even today. I can't imagine, a 9-year-old kid trying to learn on a guitar like that because the strings were high and the, rusty strings and all that, But that was my first guitar, and I took to that like a duck takes to water, and it became my passion pretty quickly.
Wow. And then what were your influences? Like, did you start listening to rock music right away or?
Well, that came a little later. I took guitar lessons for a while, to learn the fundamentals and learn how to read music.
Being the good student that Marc was, he knew the value of a music education, thus leading him to rock and roll.
Music, I'm glad I did that because I can read music. Not everybody does. So the rock thing kind of just came a little bit later as I got older,
Mhm.
I got my first electric when I was, I think, 11 or 12. And that was a Guild Starfire. I wish I had that guitar back. I sold it to one of my students when I was about 17, 18 years old. But yeah, the rock music came later, as I got older and junior high, and, was hanging out with older kids, and they were listening to, back then it was like Zeppelin and Nugent and, Aerosmith and all that kind of stuff. And those bands became my teachers.
Right.
I didn't take lessons anymore. By the way, I started teaching at 13 years old.
Really? I didn't know that.
I started teaching guitar lessons at 13 years old, and that's how I supported myself all through high school. That was my day, my job.
Wow.
Other kids had paper routes or, working at McDonald's or something. I was teaching guitar lessons.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So did you put your first band together when you lived in Batavia?
Yeah, we were living actually in a small town outside of Batavia called Pembroke at the time. My first real band, I was 15. Although I had bands in music class in school, that I remember we had like a faux Beatles band that I played. I was probably 10 or 11 years old. But my first band that actually played out and actually, got paid to, play campgrounds and backyard parties and stuff, I was 15.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Very impressive. That's really impressive. I didn't know all that about you, Marc.
Yeah.
And so that is what led you to write a book eventually, right? The Rockstar 101. Yeah, Mark was always a really good businessman. So it makes sense to me that he would write a book. He'd be inspired to help guide up and coming musicians of the pitfalls that may lie ahead. I don't think there was any kind of manual like this before. So good for him. One shameless plug.
Yeah, a little further down the career path. Yes, I wrote a book called Rockstar 101, which actually I believe it was published in 2002. So it's going on 20 years being out there, and it certainly could use an update because a lot of the digital stuff right now, a lot of the whole digital delivery stuff and just the way music is consumed and royalties are paid are so much different now than they were 20 years ago.
Sure.
So, but the underlying knowledge and tips and background and everything else is still valid.
Right.
There's funny road stories in there. When I wrote that book I wrote the manuscript in 2001. There was not a single book actually written by a recording artist.
Really? I didn't know that.
There have been lots of books written by attorneys and agents and people that were peripherally involved in the music business, but none actually written by an actual musician that started a garage band and wound up playing Madison Square Garden.
Right.
So the book is it has a different perspective because it's written by someone that went through musical boot camp on my own, and so I just wanted to share some of my knowledge and point out some of the pitfalls that can befall a young musician who's so eager to sign anything put in front of them.
Now, did that happen to you when you were in Kiel? Did that happen? Do you feel like you guys signed?
No, actually, I took my own advice and. We had representation. We had an attorney. Actually, I think you probably met him, my cousin Jeff.
Oh yeah, good old Jeff.
Who was it really, his emphasis was not in entertainment law, but
Sure.
he was able to kind of get through everything. But no, I don't feel that in Kiel that we were taken advantage of, or our managers screwed us over. You always hear complaints about record companies and stuff, and the record companies, I guess, could always do more for their artists. Mm-hmm. But I don't feel that we were taken advantage of.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
And I know you were produced by Gene Simmons, right? At least your first album or two.
Well, the first two major label releases were produced by Gene Simmons. We had a independent release in early 1984. We recorded it. It was released in October of '84. That first album was called Lay Down the Law. It was released on Mike Varney's Shrapnel Records.
Not everyone could say they actually got to work with one of their idols, but Mark can because Gene Simmons actually produced a few of his early recordings. And then ironically, one of his longtime friends, Tommy Thayer, became the guitarist in Kiss along with Paul Stanley when he replaced Ace Frehley. So it's interesting how Kiss and Gene Simmons have come in and out of his career and life.
Mm-hmm. But Gene Simmons produced the next two albums, which were The Right to Rock, which was released in '85, and The Final Frontier. It was released 35 years ago yesterday. And how do I know that? Because my Facebook blew up yesterday with everybody saying, "Wow, the 35-year anniversary of my favorite Kill album being released." So,
wow.
I believe it's over a third of a century ago that both of those albums.
Well, I have a question, if I can interrupt, because I didn't know you back then.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you knew.
I didn't know him either.
Him.
I didn't really know him.
What I knew of you, Mark, and I've never told you this. I was dating a guy, I don't know, in the early '90s, maybe late '80s, who always talked about you, and I never had any interest because I don't care about music, and I've dated rock stars and I don't care about their music. I don't care about, just cared about how they treated me. So I was totally uninterested. But I remembered Kimbra and I were talking about it one day, your career, and we were talking about doing this. And I was like, oh yeah, this guy that I used to date, I remember him always talking about Marc Ferrari. And it just struck me. But, and then when I met you, it was not anything to do with music. So it was, through Kimbra. So anyway, it was just a cute story that he idolized you. So you had a fan. In this guy, and he was a pretty good he was a musician, he was a drummer.
Well, I think Mark's got a few fans, right?
Yeah,
Not
I
just
think
this
quite
one
a
guy.
few. Yeah, but that's the first time I ever heard of you. But my question is, so you're in New York, because we kind of skipped ahead. What brought you to Los Angeles? How did you end up in California?
Well, I didn't come straight to LA from New York. I actually made a pit stop in Boston for 3 years.
Oh, okay.
The summer of my senior year, 18, I was 18, so this would have been the summer of 1980. I was attending a Judas Priest concert in Rochester, New York. Back then everybody had tailgate parties. Before the concert, everybody was, they had the tailgate parties, and I met some kids that had driven in from Boston. They were kind of following Judas Priest around. And so it was probably about a 6-7 hour drive from Boston, and these guys were, in a band, and they were needing a guitar player, and, they had a manager. He knew Judas Priest. That's how they got these tickets. So it was like, oh my God, this is my big break. Batavia, New York is not really known for being the epicenter of anything. And I was, I'm not bagging it. It's a great place to grow up, and it was a safe environment, and it was I had great friends there, great times. But I wasn't going to get a major label record deal in Batavia, New York. So for me, that was just that was my ticket out of Batavia, was finding these guys from Boston. And I moved to Boston a couple months later, right after Thanksgiving. So that was that was my first step in my journey of first of all just leaving the house and being on my own and just starting my musical journey. Of course, that band didn't wind up doing anything other than a couple of demos and a couple of gigs. But I stayed in Boston for 3 years, and wound up the last project that I was in was in an Aerosmith cover band called Last Child.
Nowadays, tribute bands have become somewhat of a subculture. Back when Mark started Last Child, the tribute band to Aerosmith, it was just a great way for a musician to make extra money.
And we were actually one of the first cover. Now there's tribute bands to tribute bands now.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Back in 1982, when we started, there weren't really a lot of tribute bands out there. Maybe there was one to Hendrix, and one to AC/DC, I remember. But anyways, three of the guys in my band had come out to California on vacation, and they came back ranting and raving about how beautiful the girls were, how beautiful the weather was, the great music scene there. And there was, in 83 really was the start of the heavy metal scene here in Los Angeles. You had the US Festival, the Heavy Metal Day. Quiet Riot album went to #1. It was the first heavy metal album to go to #1. You had bands like Rat, Dokken, Quiet Riot. They all had EPs out. And the Olympics were coming the next year. So there was all this energy about Los Angeles, this great music, this great weather, beautiful girls everywhere. So we figured, as long as we're going to be starving, let's starve where it's warmer. Let's starve where the girls are more beautiful. Let's starve where this great music is coming from. So we all moved out to California. My 3 friends went ahead of me a few months. I went back to visit my parents, over Thanksgiving '83, and I moved out to Los Angeles in '84. Now back then, funny story. Back then, when you bought a round trip, it was cheaper to buy a round trip ticket, but you could sell your unused portion. You can't do that anymore. But
Wow.
it was a round trip ticket, so it was one going, one coming back, and
Right.
you could sell your unused portion. That's what I did. I knew I wasn't coming back. I didn't need the return.
You were very confident.
Yeah, I was.
You've always been a good businessman, though, and I wanted to move a little bit forward. That I know you kind of discovered Pantera, for the lack of a better word. Is that true? Because I wasn't really into them, so I don't know much about them. Mark's instincts were spot on when it came to Pantera. He felt they could become really successful. He knew they just needed a little help with getting some much needed recognition, and he was right.
Look, Pantera had already, when I met them in '85, they actually already had recorded 2 albums, and they had a huge following in Texas. They were, from the Dallas, Texas area, and they were they were the ultimate party band there, but nobody really knew of them outside of Texas. And back then this was pre-internet, pre-cell phone, pre-internet, and so they were known in there. So I met them in 1985. Daryl was still he wasn't even 19 years old. I think he was a month short of his 19th birthday.
Wow.
And I'm the first major label guy to start waving their flag and start, telling people about them. And I helped them get their first record deal. A lot of people don't know that Pantera actually got a deal on with Keel's label at the time. It's called Gold Mountain, but it wasn't a full-blown record deal. They had to get distributed by somebody, and they were ahead of their time. So they didn't actually get that distribution deal through Gold Mountain, but they were signed to Gold Mountain, and I got them their first national press in Metal Edge magazine in I think it was 85, 86. So I was the first guy to start waving that Pantera flag.
Yeah, I know they're super. I mean, like I said, I couldn't tell you even one Pantera song, but I know they're super popular.
Yeah, well, they wound up selling about 20 million albums.
Right.
And are generally recognized as one of the greatest, power metal bands of all time.
Sure.
Wow.
No, I know they're very respected. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Now,
Do you stay in touch with them? I mean, do you still talk to them? Were they grateful? And
well, yes, and I'm in all the Pantera books, but
okay.
I'm sure your viewers probably know about the tragedy that happened to Daryl, the guitar player, was shot on stage.
No, I didn't know that.
Yes, he was murdered on stage.
Wow. How did that? Who?
Excuse me?
Who did it? I mean, who was the
Why would
person?
somebody do that?
It was a deranged fan who was under the impression that the Abbott brothers broke up Pantera, and this was 2004 when this happened. And I'm surprised you guys don't know about this because it was major news. And his brother, the drummer, died of a heart attack 2 years ago.
Oh,
so
wow.
there are two surviving members, the bassist Rex Brown, who I do stay in touch with, and the singer Phil Anselmo, who unfortunately I haven't really been in touch with in the last 10, 15 years. But they were very grateful. They wound up recording a song of mine, by the way. The album that came out, the first album that Phil recorded with them was called Power Metal. It came out in 1988. And it was the album that was released before they got their major label deal with Atco. But they recorded a song of mine called Proud to Be Loud, which was originally demoed by Keel. And it was
wow.
Keel album.
That's cool.
For whatever reason, it didn't make it on that Keel album. And I played it for the Pantera guys, and they loved it. And so I flew down and helped produce the session and coach the singer on how to
Be loud.
And I played rhythm guitar on the track, and apparently I'm only one of two people that have ever guested on a Pantera album. So
really, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
That's a nice honor.
Have you produced any other groups that I don't know about?
Not really produced in the studio, but I've written songs that have been covered by a lot of people, including one of my heroes, Ace Frehley from Kiss.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
Kiss was the first band I ever saw live in 1976, and obviously had another relationship with the Kiss guys through Gene, but Ace covered one of my songs, and a couple of Japanese bands covered songs of mine. A couple of domestic bands. So Jeff Healey, one of my favorite guitar players.
Oh yeah, Jeff Healey. Sure.
He unfortunately passed away, but he covered one song that I co-wrote. So but on the production side, I didn't really. That wasn't the path that I chose. I kind of the whole music publishing thing opened up to me, and that's the path that I took.
Hi everyone, it's Kimbra. I had a chance to work with Marc after he started his music publishing company. I had done a vocal session for a songwriter, the late Maureen Bailey, and she had written a song called Can't Resist Your Touch. Marc heard it and thought it could be really successful, so he tried to get it placed in movies and television. Eventually, it got placed in a movie called A Night at the Roxbury, which turned out to be a huge hit. So it was really fun seeing that whole process play out. ahead, Kelly.
I'm curious, in the history, I have a lot of musician friends, and I know usually there's a turning point in their career where they feel like, wow, I want to, you can't wait to call your mom and say, Mom, guess what happened? What was the point for you that you felt like this is it? This is more than I ever even thought.
Well, the first time I saw Kiss was a very pivotal moment for me. As I just mentioned, I was 14 years old. It was my first concert. And I knew from that very first note when I saw Kiss, by the way, it wasn't just hearing Kiss, it was seeing them. That really bombarded the senses. I knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. I knew 14 years old, I'm going to be on that stage someday. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get there, but I knew I was going to get there. So that was, that certainly was one pivotal, moment in my life, obviously. And then, the other steps that I took, moving to Boston, moving to California, were all just natural progressions on trying to get that goal achieved. Now, after I left Keel, I had another band called Cold Sweat, which was on MCA Records, came out in 1990. And by the time that album cycle finished, which was early 91, is when the grunge movement, kicked into overdrive. And guys like us, all of a sudden, were not the flavor of the month anymore. So the next kind of pivotal point for me was, around that same period of time when I realized that, it's going to be tough for me to try to get another record deal in this environment. I'm not a grunge guy. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't wearing Doc Martens or, or plaid. I wasn't looking like, I was on Adderall or anything. I was, dyed in the wool commercial hard rock guy. So, but I did realize that it was going to be, as I mentioned, tough for me to get another record deal. And the whole Cold Sweat thing took 4 years out of my life. And it was around the same period of time that I started getting some of my demo recordings used in TV shows and films. Very, very small placements, B movies that went straight to home video, or straight to late night cable. But, they give me a couple $100 and a screen credit, and more importantly, they gave me an idea. That was my aha moment when I started, making some money doing that and realizing probably some more opportunities here, so.
Not everyone will see as a great opportunity when it's in front of them, but I believe Kelly and I would both agree that Marc was really sharp to jump on this and create this amazing library catalog of songs for movies and television. It was kind of a unique concept of the time to create songs that were so good. I don't think before that, maybe the quality of songs that was used for source music and other things, music videos, commercials, was not as good as the quality of songs that Marc had created for Master Source.
It's a great example of the expression one door closing and another door opening. So that was the next part of Marc Ferrari's journey, was deciding that my career as a player had to come to an end, at least temporarily, and I had to figure something else out. And that was the one door closing and the other door opening.